What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, great show coming up. Billy Liucci going to join us in a little bit, dig into all things A&M, talk some Texas as well. What do you think Billy thinks about Texas and the year one schedule that the Longhorns got?
I think you just cut it off at what do you think he thinks about Texas. I think the answer is about the same.
True. Very true. But love having Billy on, and he was dealing with a million things the other day, so it was great to be able to get him for a little bit and talk about a bunch of different A&M storylines. So we're going to also have something on that I've been wanting to do for a little bit now, but we really didn't have, I don't want to say the reason to do it, but now I feel like I have a reason to do it with how slow spring football has been and the lack of things that have come out, and me not wanting to just talk about the same things over and over again. So we did this 2 years ago, this premise of one take on every core four team that's going to make you sound smart. We called it Power 5 at the time. And that's going to be the plan today. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. And we also have Lad of the Week coming up. But first, we have a word from our newest partner, Dabble. With March Madness entering the Sweet 16 and Elite 8, you can get in on the fun with Dabble Fantasy. Dabble is one of the newest and best apps in the DFS space, and they've wasted no time making a name for themselves. Dabble's social function is second to none, and they offer a wide variety of sports for making picks, including college football and basketball. Use promo code SDS2 when you sign up today to receive $25 in bonus cash. No deposit required. Again, that's promo code SDS2 for $25 in bonus cash, courtesy of the good folks at Dabble. All right, so we're doing one take on every core four team that's going to make you sound smart. And, well, I thought it'd be a good time to do this because we're hitting a time of year in which maybe you're going to be going outside, being a little bit more social. You're going to neighborhood barbecues. Do people still do neighborhood barbecues? I don't know. Grad parties coming up in the very near future. You're looking for that thing once March Madness ends of, hey, I should probably turn the page to football. SEC fan bases, maybe you're going to be like, I need to turn the page to football immediately after my team loses in March Madness. Oh, by the way, as of this recording, still half of the SEC's NCAA bids still alive. But this could also be just a situation where if you are overwhelmed by the portal and you just think that it's harder to keep up with this stuff and harder to keep up with other teams besides your own, and maybe you're only locked into teams even in your conference, this is kind of a cheat sheet for you. This is a cheat sheet. This is conversation topics. This is things that'll kind of get you going in that direction. If anything piques your interest, then you're like, all right, maybe it's worth it to be able to learn more about this team. But this is at least not going to have you in Charles Barkley mode when you're asked about a specific first half and you realize that you have watched zero of this first half and you're on live television. Does that make sense?
Listen, we're all playing a little bit of who he played for in the modern college football, college sports in general, so we understand that. But at the same time, even I think we have now reached the point where if you want to be a serious college football fan, the joke about which conference are they in, outside of like an SMU or something, is pretty, because I think that's the version of who he played for, is which conference is this team in. I think this is going to be enough to get everyone kind of like on the same page.
And we'll do it so where we go through by conference. So even if you're forgetting, wait, which conference is Cal in again? We're going to have you covered in that way too. I thought about doing this alphabetically just for all the core four teams. And then it was like, you know what, let's just go by conference. That's easier. And a reminder for those who don't hear the term core four outside of this podcast, the core four is the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC. And just so I don't have to make some sort of weird exception, we're going to put Notre Dame in there as part of the core four plus. So we'll go in that order. That's what we're going to do. ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and Notre Dame. This is one take about every core four team that's going to make you sound smart. Let's start in the ACC. Boston College. Don't worry about losing Thomas Castellanos or if Grayson James is going to be the guy, because former Alabama transfer Dylan Lonergan, he's going to be ready. Simple enough. Don't need to get into any Bill O'Brien facts there. Cal. Angry Brian Harsin coming in hot. That's right. Brian
He's
Harsin.
letting them know.
Letting the people know, the great people of Berkeley that I'm sure he will see eye to eye on every single issue. Brian Harsin is the OC at Cal. And I'm just going to repeat that to myself every single day until this season starts. And then maybe even after the season starts, because that's worth it to remember. Brian Harsin is running a college football offense again. Cheers to that. Clemson. Number one in America in percentage of returning production with a roster that, look, 99% of other coaches would probably trade for in a heartbeat because TJ Parker, Peter Woods, Cade Klubnik, those guys are all preseason All-Americans.
Yeah, if you don't let people leave, you're number one returning production. No one wants to talk about that. If you just close the transfer portal and hide everyone's logins, you're going to bring everybody back every year.
Ask Clemson what it would have been like to have Andrew Makuba last year. They could have used that guy. Just saying. They let people leave. It's just maybe a little bit tougher. Maybe you got to do, we all now in this day and age have 2-factor verification. Maybe Clemson's 3-factor verification.
There you go.
Something like that. Duke, Darian Mensah, the Tulane transfer quarterback. He's going to be a better version of Malik Murphy. That might be a little bit of a hot take. I did like Darian Mensah a lot and thought he would have been fascinating at LSU, not just because the in-state thing, but just because that was before we knew what Garrett Nussmeier was going to be doing, and thought he really would have made a lot of sense with him playing as a true freshman last year. Florida State. I'm not sure that Gus is going to be the guy to save Mike Norvell.
Is that funnier than Harsin? I mean, now we've talked about both of them. And it's one of the things Auburn fans can't even exactly laugh at it because they got Hugh Freeze. So it's like, that is just a fast. I'm going to watch a lot of FSU games next year.
I've had this exact conversation with a guy that I've become friends with talking football at the playground. Parents, you get this. If you have been in that spot where you're taking your dog for a walk or something like that, you go to a local dog park, you take your kids to the playground or something, there's people that you see on a regular basis. There's a buddy of mine who talk Florida State football with every single time I'm there. Claire's going to spend 20 minutes on the swings, and we're going to spend 20 minutes talking Florida State football. Like, that's just the reality of it. All right, Georgia Tech. I get that the $10 million guarantee was big, but I hate that they're playing Georgia in Mercedes-Benz and not on a college campus for the first time in nearly a century. That's weird. That's I try and, we try and be adapt or die guys, and, you got to understand the times and all that stuff, but like, that's just going to be one of those things that doesn't sit quite right, that game's not going to be played at Bobby Dodd this year. Louisville. Miller Moss got a raw deal at USC, and he's going to be the next great Jeff Brom transfer quarterback. Not a hot take. I don't think that's that hot of a take, at least, with the way that's played out for him. Will, you'll like this one. Miami. Carson Beck eliminated distractions with Hannah Cavender in that breakup, and now he can focus on football.
Man, I'm realizing that Miami is actually the perfect place for Carson Beck because every day for him is an adventure, and that's how Miami is. So tomorrow he could have a new girlfriend, he can get a new tattoo, he could have a new car. The world's his oyster. He could have a pet python. So yeah, I actually will be watching a lot of Miami, and really, I might even turn on notifications for Carson Beck because it really does feel like about every other week something's wild going on over there.
Got to be careful with some of the stuff that's going to get thrown out there with him in this day and age. Could be some fake news type stuff that's hitting the masses, but it does kind of feel like basically every day it's something new with Carson Beck. NC State feels like Dave Doran's last hurrah. Kind of feels like the end of the road. He's the ACC version of Mark Stoops.
Yep.
Really.
Wow.
Started the same year too. Started the same exact year. Built a really good program for a long time. That for a while you're like, man, this team just always punches above its weight. And now you're kind of looking up going, it's been a little bit tougher. Maybe this thing has kind of run its course. North Carolina. I don't know how this Bill Belichick era is going to end, but I know that it can start with a 9-3 record and sneaky playoff buzz if they keep Max Johnson healthy. Huge if, as you know all too well.
This is a Mad Lib. This isn't real life. The Bill Belichick 9-3 sneaky playoff buzz with Mac Johnson. All right, man.
Yeah, no big deal. Max Johnson's still doing it. Year 12 of college football. I'm all for it. I know there's a lot of pushback on the 25-year-olds that are taking up a scholarship spot, just get a real job, going to. Yeah, you know what? Some guys
haters.
Yeah, some guys are just hating on the guys that have been hurt throughout most of their careers. Hope Max Johnson has a really good season. Pitt, the most fun player that nobody's talking about is Desmond Reed. I banged the drum for this. I took him in our non-quarterback Heisman draft. Desmond Reed. Very, very fun guy at tailback. Going to make Pitt interesting to watch if they're on that random ESPN noon game that you're filling your time with. SMU. People are going to sleep on Kevin Jennings because of how bad he was in that Penn State game. And, buddy, he was bad. He was real bad. But he'll be left out of those early conversations of like, who's the best quarterback in college football? Just because we remember that very, very well. And we need to get the bad taste of our mouths out with maybe just a month of really solid football from Kevin Jennings at SMU. Stanford, very topical here. Andrew Luck needs to just hire himself to be the head coach after the Troy Taylor fallout.
I mean, he's like the opposite of Deion Sanders, right? Like he was rocking the flip phone in the NFL, and he like drinks a ton of milk and stuff. Like I feel like maybe like 1980s coaching, the kind of environment like his dad or whatever came up in would be great for him. But I think modern, he needs to be like an advisor, you know.
He's general manager though, like he's already kind of in that role at Stanford. You know, he made this decision. He made the decision to move on from Troy Taylor after that initial report came out, and I don't know, like if you're embracing those types of modern ways of college football, I'm just saying, Andrew Luck, just name yourself head coach. Do it.
Richard Sherman.
That's a good idea, Will. That's a good idea. You want to turn around the vibes at Stanford. Richard Sherman is a vibe changer.
You have your Deion in-house, buddy. Go get him.
That's a really good call. I like that. Syracuse. I know it's going to be tough to replace Kyle McCord. They're trying to do so with, I believe, Ricky Collins, the former LSU transfer. But don't assume that Fran Brown is going to let his team collapse in year two. Too good of a coach. Just too good of a coach. He's already shown that. Again, we don't judge year one coaches. We don't want to overreact. What he did in that first season at Syracuse, I feel like should have everyone on notice. Virginia. It's bowl or bust for Tony Elliott, the former Clemson assistant, and with a schedule that doesn't have the likes of Clemson, Miami, or SMU, 6 wins has got to be the floor for that program, or else you got nobody to blame but yourself. Virginia Tech. The Beamer Bowl is going to be a tough pill to swallow for Brent Pry if he cannot get an opening weekend victory in Atlanta. That would be, you don't want to have that. That is a really awkward conversation to have when the guy who everybody thinks should have your job beats you at your job. Not ideal. Not ideal. And in a weird way, maybe South Carolina fans would look at that and be like, oh boy, I don't want Shane to leave for Virginia Tech. For the record, I'll go on record saying this. I don't think Shane Beamer wants to take that job based on everything that I know about him. Yeah. I'd be surprised if that ended up happening, but it's just always going to be one of those things in the back of your mind whenever that job comes open.
I'll do a quick check-in here because we're already all the way almost through a conference. VT, are they just never going to be what they were when we were kids?
Do they have Michael Vick coming through that door? Better yet, do they have Marcus Vick coming through that door?
But Tyrod Taylor, you know, they had the gentleman who's not playing tight end. I forgot his name, the huge dude. But they had like 4 or 5 good quarterbacks back to back that like were good, and they had great defenses. And obviously, Beamer would still think, is VT just a coach program, and now they're just gone?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be really difficult to climb, despite the fact that they have a pretty nice recruiting ground, actually. Sort of an underrated recruiting ground in that area of the country, and can definitely compete at that level. But it doesn't feel like they're knocking on the door of 10-2 or anything like that. At least not yet. And I liked the Brent Pry hire too. So that's the frustrating thing for a program like that. Wake Forest. Jake Dickert coming over from Washington State. He might have his hands full in year one. I fully expect it's going to be ugly post Dave Clawson, but long term, I think we're going to look back on him as being maybe the best hire of this cycle. Not that controversial to take. Pretty limited cycle. Yeah, unless Stanford hires Richard Sherman, in which case we got to add that one to it. But yeah, that I do think will end up working out well for him. Just maybe not. This is going to feel very year zero for Wake Forest. Big 12. We're moving right along. Arizona. At least Noah Fafita's coming back.
Again.
Poor Noah Fafita. He's going to lose his boy T-Mac. That's going to be a rough watch. I banged the drum for Noah Fafita, but there might be some limited options what they've got coming in. Arizona State. Kenny Dillingham almost got to the semifinals, and he returns the number 2 team in America in percentage of returning production. So this is easily a 10-win team. Do not expect Arizona State to fall off. You're skeptical, I can tell.
One big guy they're losing, obviously, but that wasn't just a one-player team, obviously. And
I love Scadaboo. Just saying that you point to that. Sam Levitt, he plays big time YOLO ball, but you get Jordan Tyson back. This is potentially a very, very fun team that might not have the drop off that some might expect. That's again, these are just conversation pieces to bring to your conversation. So if someone does come at you with, Arizona State, they lost Scadaboo, they're going to be terrible. You say, no, they're actually second in the country in percentage of returning production. That's a good fact to be able to have. Baylor. Nobody talks about how this team was 6-3 in the Big 12, and it ranks 11th in America in percentage of returning production with year 2 of Sawyer Robertson as the QB1, the former Mississippi State transfer. That was like 4 or 5 things in one. Just remember one of those things you'll be fine about Baylor. Auburn fans, that was for you. You're facing Baylor in the season opener Friday night. That game got moved to. If you don't want to remember all that, just remember Baylor, Auburn, or I guess Auburn, Baylor, that game being played on Friday night. Maybe we'll see Walker White against his former team. We'll see. BYU. Jake Retzlaff, a.k.a. BY Jew, best nickname in college football. The best.
Love that.
Him only being 120-1 in the Heisman odds is insane to me. And so is BYU with just having the 6th best odds to win the Big 12 behind the likes of Kansas State, Arizona State, who I just talked about Arizona State. No problem with that. Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas. Those teams are all ahead of BYU in the Big 12 preseason odds. Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Wow, they're going to be sleeper again, huh? Anyway.
Yeah, kind of. BYU just always kind of feels that way. You never go into a season as like BYU is a top 15 team, and then you kind of look up and you're like, oh, wow, they're sitting there at 8-1. Maybe that won't be the case this year. Do have a lot of defensive turnover. Cincinnati. If Scott Satterfield is gone at season's end, Brian Hartline needs to be the target. That's going to be the guy to watch in these coaching circles if he has a good year calling plays, replacing Chip Kelly at Ohio State. People forget about that. That was a conversation I had the other day, too, with shout out my buddy Drew. We were talking about how many coaches now still have offensive play calling duties. And he was like, Ohio State with Ryan Day, right? And I'm like, oh, no, remember Chip Kelly last year came over. Now it's going to be Brian Hartline. These are the types of conversations maybe not all of you have at all times, but these are the conversations I find myself in.
And also, that does create a cascade. That's a really good point, because we were all kind of circling the corpse of Ryan Day, being like, hey, Hartline, hang out for a couple of years, and Ryan Day will probably be out of here, and you'll be the guy, and they'll love you because you'll be the hometown kid. Now it's like, what do you think about Cincinnati, buddy? Maybe you can go ahead over there, because Day's not going anywhere.
That's a good point. Hey, last time Cincinnati hired a former Ohio State assistant, worked out pretty well. Certainly Luke Fickell. Just saying. Colorado. Between Caden Salter and Julian Lewis, the 5-star true freshman, replacing Shedeur is the least of Deion's worries. Going to be a big conversation topic. Everybody knows Shedeur Sanders. Everybody knows Travis Hunter. Talk about quarterback situation. Maybe not as bad as one would think. Houston. I am pumped to see Connor Wigman get a new opportunity after the way that it played out against A&M, or after the way that it played out at A&M. And we talked to Billy Liucci a little bit briefly kind of about that and transitioning to Marcel Reed and all that stuff as well. But not selling stock. Haynes King stock I have. Connor Wigman stock I have as well. Also Jalen Henderson stock. Not the last mention of Jalen Henderson, former A&M quarterback as well.
Houston, interesting in the NIL era. I'll just leave it there.
Not interesting with basketball. They're like almost borderline boring how good they are with basketball and the way that they recruit there. But yes, it is an interesting program with Willie Fritz. Iowa State. Isn't it crazy to think that Matt Campbell gets rumored for all of these jobs whenever Iowa State gets to a bowl game, and he's about to enter year 10 in Ames? Year 10?
That's like Grandpa Joe territory. Now the guy's egg shit.
Year 10 at Iowa State? That is an eternity. That is not the type of job that one would expect to be there for a decade. Or if you are, it's because you're not particularly good and they just don't feel like they can do anything better.
Haven't won a conference championship since the Ottoman Empire was around. My favorite stat.
See, I tried to give him something nice for the 6 Iowa State fans that are listening to this show, and you just throw that out there. You had to throw out the Ottoman Empire.
He loves it there.
It's true. It's true. Almost moved to Ames, Iowa once upon a time. People forget that. Kansas. Only Kansas could get into the top 20 and have all this preseason, early September buzz, and then lose 5 games in a row by 11 points or less and end up being somehow the scariest 5-win team in America. One of the weirder seasons in recent memory. Like, Kansas had 3 consecutive wins against AP top 25 competition. They handed BYU that loss. They won at BYU too. Very, very strange season. Jalen Daniels, not to be confused with Jaden Daniels, coming back next year as well. 6th season, I want to say it's 6th or 7th. He's been around for a long time. He's
almost on like Michael Penix's trajectory if he does well this year, because he has been around so long. Almost every time we've seen him, he's looked good, but he just can't put it together, and the team has struggled.
Yeah, and finally stayed healthy last year, but still just took him a little bit too long. Maybe the early season working his way back from injury, maybe that had something to do with it. Kansas State. You are, in my opinion, crazy if you don't think Chris Kleiman is a top 15 coach in the sport after 3 consecutive 9-win seasons in Manhattan. Pretty good. Needs to be part of those conversations. Oklahoma State. I'm still stunned that Mike Gundy agreed to a $1 million pay cut and a restructured buyout to keep his job. But if you're thinking this is going to be Jim Harbaugh-esque, I would say go ask Dan Mullen about a restructured contract when Todd Grantham is your defensive coordinator. Yeah. Todd Grantham, defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State.
Whoa. I was about to say, that's a little bit of breaking news to me. That's crazy. Gundy and Todd Grantham. That was a loud room.
I know, right? Going to be some yelling in that room. That was one of those second week of December headlines that with everything that was going on in the sport, you see it in passing, and then you're like, wait a minute, 2 hours after the fact or 2 weeks after the fact, wait a minute, I didn't dream that, did I? Todd Grantham, he's going to be the defensive coordinator again? Yep, Oklahoma State. The
force at which Dadgummit is going to be exiting the lips. Anyway.
I think he's got a little bit something stronger than Dadgummit last I checked. TCU. It's wild that TCU drew a national TV game against what I would say are the 2 splashiest hires of the 2020s, Deion Sanders, Bill Belichick, and they're facing both of them in their debuts. Weird. Yeah. Not sure how that ended up. TCU, UNC, Monday night. That's a game that everybody's going to be locked into for the Belichick factor. And TCU is somehow playing that game. Remember 2 years ago, they are coming off 65-7. I mean, the national runner-up season, and then they lose the season opener to Colorado. The Colorado hype train is off and running. Maybe the UNC hype train will be off and running after a TCU loss in that one too. Texas Tech. Buddy, Joey McGuire has that whole program right now is just all systems go. And that is, if you haven't been paying attention to what Texas Tech has been doing, mainly in the portal, recruiting as well, look no further than super mega booster billionaire. Yes, billionaire with a B, Cody Campbell, who helped fund a $10 million transfer portal class. Yeah. A lot of people very much interested in the whereabouts of Cody Campbell and somebody that has become kind of a fascinating figure in college football. I was talking to Matt Hayes about him last week, and Matt just spent some time with him for a story that'll be coming out in USA Today. UCF. Scott Frost, he is entering a different world at UCF than the one that he left in 2017, and surely his inability to win a one-score game, that's not going to follow him back to Orlando. That stayed in Nebraska as far as I'm concerned. Don't look up who his defensive coordinator is. It's Alex Grinch.
I think it's impossible. That's what I was going to say. I don't think it's possible to have one-score games with Alex Grinch. So you're either going to win big or lose big, brother. That's the MO.
That's galaxy brain stuff by Scott Frost. I salute a move like that. Utah. Cam Rising was great for those 3 decades he spent in college, but it was time to move on this time. West Virginia. I told you there'd be another mention of this guy. Rich Rod is going to turn Jalen Henderson into Pat White, and I am here for it.
Gosh. We outlaw the Cam Newton cops, but we could have Pat White, the lefty option quarterback. Oh, I love Pat White.
Jalen Henderson, some would say poor man's Pat White. Very, very poor man's
caffeine-free diet Pat. Absolutely not. I loved Pat White. I thought he was going to be something with the Dolphins. That was one of my most amateurish sport take.
Jalen Henderson, if you go into Kroger, Publix, or something like that, they've got the knockoff brand of Coke or something. Jalen Henderson, that version of Pat White. Yeah. All right, that's the Big 12. Big 10. We're halfway home, Will. See, this isn't that bad. There's a lot that goes into this, but we can do this. We're going to get through all of these teams, all of these core 4 teams. Illinois. If this weren't Illinois, there'd be zero doubt about a preseason top 10 ranking for a team that won 10 games last year and is 3rd in America in percentage of returning production. Shout out Bert.
So you would never stand this team, kind of being from Illinois roundabouts. I know you're more of a Chicago guy, but that's just outside of your purview, even if Bert gets the boys cooking.
I went to Illinois games as a kid.
Right.
My mom's an Illinois grad. I am in a text group with a bunch of my cousins who are Illinois grads. My brother was supposed to go to Illinois until he ended up getting a scholarship to play baseball at Valparaiso like 2 months before the start of his freshman year. I've been following Illinois for a long time. Juice Williams, really it's been. Yeah, I can go back on that. But there is always going to be that skepticism for a team like Illinois going into a year, because if you haven't necessarily been at the forefront of college football relevance, we're always going to ask that question. But would I have any problem with Illinois starting off in the top 10? No.
And the real story is you can't root for Indiana and Illinois because you feel like they're both going to let you down. So you got to pick one.
Yeah, like we talked about last year, how everybody should just pick a Big 12 team to just hop on the bandwagon for the new look Big 12 and just pretend it's Pac-12 after dark. That's maybe what you can do with some of these haven't been there teams from the Big 10, of which there are several. We'll get to a couple more of them right now.
And they're super fun. Was always going with that, but yes.
Definitely, yes. Luke Altmaier, man. Luke Altmaier all day. Indiana. You know this one hits near and dear. That schedule got slightly tougher with Oregon and Penn State added to it. The Big Ten didn't do the SEC thing where they just flipped. They didn't do that because they have more of a long-term plan locked in.
That's still so funny. Like, the SEC's been ahead on everything. And the fact that they just went, you know what, run it back. It's just so uncharacteristic.
Well, you kind of have to, because you're going to upset people if you don't. If you're like, hey, you gave them that schedule. We need to be able to get these games at home. And it kind of makes sense for a 2-year deal a bit. But the Big Ten has stuff a little bit more locked in. But yeah, that schedule got slightly tougher with Oregon and Penn State. But Vegas very clearly still believes in a certain Curt Cignetti, because that over-under is 8.5 wins, Will. I'm just saying, in my unbiased opinion, not a team to write off just yet. Not yet. Iowa. If you think that this is going to be the same old Iowa offense, educate yourself on South Dakota State transfer Mark Gronowski. Very intriguing transfer. Well, could end up being one of those guys that we look up. Iowa's in the playoff mix, and you're like, wait a minute, Iowa can actually throw the football? They have this guy that can be considered a true dual threat that you legitimately have to respect. And the Iowa offense with Tim Lester was better last year post Brian Ferentz, because how could it not be better post Brian Ferentz? But just saying, don't sleep on the addition of Mark Gronowski. Maryland. It's going to be extremely difficult to replace Ty Felton after he led Core 4 with 8 catches per game. Not a whole lot else on Maryland. I didn't want to go down the Kevin Sumlin rabbit hole. If you wish to do that with your own time. Michigan. The start of the Bryce Underwood era is inevitable in this first year. It's going to happen during his true freshman season. That's the way this always works. But it wouldn't surprise me if Mikey Keene is the guy for at least the first month of the season. Remember, they got week 2 at Oklahoma. They got to go to Nebraska week 4. Might make a little bit more sense if they're trying to ease him into it and just kind of see what they have in the veteran quarterback before throwing the true freshman out there. They
got to do the Lagway method here. They got to just wait till the season is like a stinker. Wait till the guys are writing him off, and then just bring him out there. Don't even really split time. Like literally just go, here you go, shiny nice thing, and they'll buy you another year.
Yeah, and speaking of buy, that'll be the discussion in Ann Arbor. If Mikey Keene struggles at any point, we'll say, how much are you paying Bryce Underwood to sit on the bench?
Yep.
Get him out there. Let's see what you got in him. Michigan State. Aiden Childs, the former Oregon State transfer who followed Jonathan Smith to Michigan State. He can, I shouldn't say he can. If he can cut down on the picks and just force feed Nick Marsh, who was great as a true freshman, the Spartans won't be fighting for a bowl berth in year 2 with Jonathan Smith. That's a positive, I think. Minnesota. Minnesota had the number 9 scoring defense, and it ranks 11th in FBS in percentage of returning defensive production, which we would be talking about a lot more if not for the fact that Miami poached DC Corey Heatherman. Not great. They're still rowing the boat. Speaking of Matt Campbell, PJ Fleck, a little bit similar in that regard. Just guys that everybody assumed would be gone after a certain point. And you're looking up, you're like, wow, they're actually like one of the longest tenured coaches in their conference. How about that?
Yeah, they're confusing because like PJ Fleck very much gives like offensive coordinator vibes. Like he very much gives like, dry fit, yelling, doing the motivational stuff. But they were like a gross defensive team last year if you watched them. But it was like, this isn't the PJ Fleck experience I remember. So they were a tough team.
Yeah, and PJ Fleck's background is with receivers too. Like that's actually like what he knows best. And he's a little bit more of a skill position type guy. And that's, I think benefited them at certain spots at Minnesota. Nebraska. I don't care about Dylan Raiola's weight if he can stop taking 20-yard losses on sacks, which is something that I think Dana Holgerson should help him with more than Marcus Satterfield should. That's not a hot take. Yeah. Sure. Northwestern. It's still weird that Northwestern's 7 home games are at a makeshift stadium and Wrigley Field.
That sounds awesome. Oh, he's over it now. I thought we liked the temporary stadium.
I liked it until I looked up their scoring against Core 4 competition and realized they had 15 points per game there.
They were trying to grow the grass at their old stadium. This team is not built to score points.
True. If they have year 2 grass,
I'm just let the grass grow.
Let the grass grow a little bit longer. Teams are slowing down a little bit tougher to rush off the edge when you got that thick grass. I'm just saying. Ohio State. I don't know about replacing Jim Knowles with Matt Patricia, but I do know it's pretty hard to mess up a defense that's got Caleb Downs at the center of it. And I say at the center of it because that guy plays everywhere. This guy should help your floor. If you're terrified of Matt Patricia, Ohio State fans, remember Caleb Downs may be the best player in all of college football.
Matt Patricia is famous for getting situations that are hard to mess up and then messing them up. Like, oh, wow, this defense is really good. What happened? I don't get how that guy is in college. But anyway.
To be fair, I think it was easy for him as a defensive-minded guy to mess up being an offensive play caller for the Patriots.
That's so wow. Anyway, yeah, moving on. Can't even get into Matt Patricia's career.
Yeah. Oregon. There are actually people who think Dan Lanning will never win big games, even though he's a 30-something coach who's off to a 35-6 start with 10 wins against ranked competition and a 4-4 record against AP top 10 teams. That's right. Dan Lanning has as many wins against AP top 10 teams as one James Franklin. Just saying. Speaking of good old Jimmy Franklin, Penn State. Mm-hmm. As great as it was that Penn State won the Jim Knowles sweepstakes to set the stage probably for a preseason top 3, top 4 ranking, it feels like not enough people are focused on losing Abdul Carter and the fact that Penn State does not have another Abdul Carter ready to go.
And I mean, defense was never the issue, right? It's actually been awesome how their defense has been. So yeah, let's say their defense stays the same. They still have the same offense. So it's like, good luck.
And haven't exactly beefed up. I shouldn't say beefed up. Well, depending on how you view that. Yeah, let's say that. They might have beefed up with their receiver additions in the portal. Mm-hmm. We'll wait and see what that ends up looking like post-spring. Purdue. Barry Odom took in 29 transfers, which is basically what Curt Cignetti did after he came to Indiana from a Group of 5 program, but being last in Core 4 percentage of returning production, not ideal. Year 0 for Barry Odom in West Lafayette.
Going to be rough.
Yeah. Rutgers. There is nobody more perfectly fit to coach the exact program that they are coaching than Greg Schiano at Rutgers, coming off consecutive winning seasons. How about that? Nobody's surprised at all. UCLA. Deshaun Foster, he's in a brutal spot, probably getting fired if UCLA misses a bowl game again. Not ideal. Really not. USC. We already talked about this one. You guys have this in your back pocket already. Lincoln Riley can be fired with cause and perhaps not paid more money than Jimbo Fisher to go away, all because he messed up his analyst program a year before the analyst program became a free-for-all. Good for Lincoln Riley.
And hats off to USC. If they do that, they're really going to get on Tennessee's level of, they said they wanted an arms race with the SEC. Welcome to it.
Tennessee had to have the coup, and USC doesn't have to create anything. It's just there. It's all there.
This is your moment, USC. How serious are you?
The work has been done for you. This is going to be a real question mark for USC in the 2020s. Is can you pull the trigger on making what a lot of people could end up thinking is the very smart and obvious move? Washington. I'm not saying Washington is going to beat Ohio State, but I am saying that Jed Fish led one of 3 Big Ten teams that posted an undefeated home record last year, and their first Big Ten home game of 2025 is against Ohio State, who lost in its first Big Ten trip to the Pacific Northwest last year. Again, not saying Washington is going to beat Ohio State. Just keep that in mind. Wisconsin.
That's crazy. Wait, I'm sorry. They didn't lose a home game last year at Washington?
And ask how many road games they won, Will.
Probably not. I see as much 0 green as red here, so I'm going to guess that they didn't. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. Just a perfect split. Undefeated at home, winless on the road. Hard to do it. Really hard to do that.
I'm glad I looked this up. Oh, my God. So every time they got on a bus, they lost. Every time they walked to the stadium, they won. That is so crazy.
I don't think they were getting on a bus for any of those road games, Will.
No, you're right. You see what I'm saying? You're right. This isn't like Blue Mountain State or something. Yeah, anytime they got on an airplane to go to Eastern Michigan, or whatever. Yeah,
more likely to get on a cross-country ship or something like that. Go on they're closer to the other side. Just take the ocean route. Go the other way. Go
just
past
get an ocean liner, taking the Titanic to their road games.
Yeah, Wisconsin. Wisconsin plays 10 games against core 4 teams. 8 of them are against teams that won at least 8 games last year, which feels not ideal for a program that just missed bowl eligibility for the first time in 23 years because it lost 5 in a row to end the regular season. Not good. SEC, we made it, Will.
We did it.
We made it. We made it to the SEC. Some of these you've heard a little bit before. I try not to repeat myself too much. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. This is what we do. Alabama. The Ryan Grubb, Kalen DeBoer connection should overcome questions at quarterback, even as seemingly one guy in that quarterback room gets all the buzz every other week. That's just the way that's been working in Tuscaloosa. And if it doesn't overcome those questions, those two guys, Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer, will only have themselves to blame for that.
Y'all been hearing me all off season. Trust the bromance. I was telling my stepbrother this. He was a self-proclaimed Gump. Trust the bromance. This is your time for DeBoer to work.
Has to. Absolutely has to. I'm not saying that means he's fired. I'm saying that means that this is what you asked for, and you have it, and now this is your opportunity. Arkansas. A lot of people will talk about the returning connection of Taylor Green, Bobby Petrino. Lord knows we're going to talk about it. But Arkansas football, last I checked, it's still all about embracing the hog.
Did you say Taylor Green's a Four Loco quarterbacks?
The Four Loco quarterback, Taylor Green. The Four Loco quarterback and the team that needs to embrace the hog.
Mm-hmm.
Don't infer anything else with that. So we said what we said.
Mm-hmm.
Auburn. If Auburn can't throw the ball with a group of receivers this talented, maybe its most talented group of receivers ever, I don't think it'll ever be able to do that with Hugh Freeze. That's going to be an issue.
They're going to end up with Bobby Petrino next, aren't they? I bet they will, dude.
Head coach?
No, I mean OC. If Freeze gets another year, let's say he wins about 8 games, they're going to end up with the Hail Mary Bobby Petrino. That would be 3 SEC teams in a row.
Yeah, but then you're potentially getting into a situation for Bobby Petrino that's very reminiscent of what you were in with Jimbo. And given the way that we've heard Petrino speak about that and the lack of control, I don't know that he would sign up for that again. But never say never. Weirder things have happened. Florida. Don't forget that DJ Lagway is going to have a healthy Trey Wilson this year. I feel like people will forget that by media days. So that's the only reason why I wanted to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia. How many Georgia arrests behind the wheel will it take for Kirby Smart to actually solve that problem? Because 25 in the last 26 months feels like a lot. It is a lot.
I feel like I'm going crazy about this story. You've heard me talk about this. Look, if it was LSU, I'd be saying the exact same things. I just don't know how he keeps getting away with this. But again, not my place to really, who am I? But someone's got to care eventually, right?
Suspended indefinitely. It's not like they're not being punished. It's just weird that and whenever that headline comes across, you think to yourself, how can this still be happening?
Mm-hmm.
And how was what happened at the beginning of this with a tragedy, what kind of got those wheels going? It's very, very weird that it's persisted the way that it has. Kentucky. I don't know if they're going to pay Mark Stoops that buyout, but it's about to get real awkward if UK has another disappointing season. Something we've said many times before. Probably say it many times again.
Mm-hmm.
LSU will. If Brian Kelly doesn't make it to the playoff with this roster, I will wonder if he's ever going to lead LSU to the places that it wants to go.
You know what? This LSU team officially has playoff expectations. If LSU does not make the playoffs, LSU fans should be disappointed, and you should dump on us, and I will too.
How much will you dump on LSU?
I've been known to dump on LSU too much for some people's liking, so probably a little bit more than I ever have if we're here, because there's no excuses.
And I promise to everyone that if you don't do enough dumping, I will add more dumping to my plate.
And also Kyle Williams, now LSU's D-line coach. Look him up. Fun stuff there, former player.
Fun video guy to see.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Bill's pep talks that guy was a part of. Mississippi State. People forget. Florida State offered Luke Kromenhoek, offered him a scholarship before he even started a high school game. And now he gets to learn a Jeff Lebby offense. Probably not starting from the jump. Blake Shapen, probably still going to get that treatment. But Luke Kromenhoek, name to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Mizzou. Ahmad Hardy. He has a legitimate chance to lead the SEC in rushing after a 1,300-yard season at Louisiana Monroe. And there's a very good chance that by the end of the 2025 season, we're going to say, wow, Eli Drinkwitz had another one of those running backs that everybody knew by the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma. For all the questions about the new offense, I still think that defense is going to be nasty. Even though they lost Stutzman, they lost Bowman. I trusted Brent Venables' defense. Would have been really nice to add Jim Knowles to that equation, allow Brent Venables to kind of focus a little bit more big picture CEO type stuff. They're still going to be incredibly good on that side of the ball. Ole Miss. It won't be surprising if Austin Simmons and Caden Lee, that connection ends up being the best in the SEC by season's end. I think there's a really good possibility on that. Caden Lee, a guy that is not getting discussed a lot with some of these preseason conversations I've noticed, but Austin Simmons certainly is. And if Austin Simmons is going to have a go-to guy, that's going to be it.
See, that's an all-time water cooler / you're at the park type take right there. Hey, Austin Simmons, Caden Lee connection. Heard of him? Boom. That's a nice little one-liner. I like that.
Austin Simmons might also be Tua Tagovailoa. Just saying. Looks a little bit like him. Just a little bit. South Carolina. In the latter half of 2024, Lenore Sellers was the top 5 quarterback in the sport. Not really that bold.
Easy.
Tennessee.
It's Lenore Sellers versus Mike Shula for South Carolina this season.
Yeah. If Mike Shula is able to coach up Lenore Sellers and allow him to continue that trajectory, South Carolina will have its best quarterback in program history.
Then they'll hire Matt Patricia. Anyway.
Please don't. Please don't. I beg of you. I don't think Beamer would do that. Tennessee. Nico Iamaleava. Just pronounce it. That's all you got to do. Just say it. That's a sign that you know ball. If you know how to say Nico's last name, you're good. That's your conversation. Nobody will say, oh, yeah, what did you think about last year? Did you like how much he ran in the Ohio State game? What do you feel about the turnover at receiver? No. All you got to do is pronounce his name, and you're good. That's fine.
The amount of people, Connor, since you got on that early, that I've just been talking football to people out in the wild. I'm like, oh, yeah, they're like, who are you talking about? And I'm like, Nico, the one at Tennessee. They're like, oh, him. It's such an under-known name right now. You're right.
Texas. I think Arch is ready, but if he's not, it's a good thing he's got the best defense in college football that's going to give him some grace.
In college football, all right.
I think Texas is the best returning defense in college football.
And they technically were last year. If you take out just like the 2 Georgia games where they flexed on them. So I think that's pretty. That's actually not even that bold.
And yeah, they were the best defense in college football.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Take away that one game, and the Patriots, the best team ever in 07. Anyway.
Yeah. No, look, all Americans at every level of that defense. Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill Jr., Michael Taft. I'm just saying there's a lot, especially on that defensive line too. We are PK respecters on this show. So that's something to remember if you don't want the conversation to just be about Arch Manning at Texas. Although it's probably going to be. Let's be honest. Texas A&M. Casey Concepcion coming over from NC State. He should already be a household name, but if he's not, he is going to be soon. Not the last mention that you will hear of him on this show.
He's got you got the Islanders, but throw a little bit of Tahine on there. Watch out. He's Concepcion. I love that.
I don't think there's an accent in Concepcion, but there should be. Why wouldn't there be?
You can't just call him Casey Conception. I don't think we're going to be doing that on this show. No. So I think Concepcion is the way we're going to go. Yeah. Concepcion.
Yeah. We got to add a little flair to the end of it. Vandy, November 8th, 2025. That date, I can guarantee it's already marked on Hugh Freeze's calendar. If it is not, it should be, because it is the 4th rendition of Diego Pavia versus Hugh Freeze, and God bless it.
Is he going to be out sick that day?
Is Freeze going to be out sick that day?
He's going to take a PTO day. He's going to be like, I woke up, threw it up, guys. I can't see this Pavia guy again.
I don't want to make that joke given the way that Hugh Freeze recent cancer diagnosis, like stuff like that. We don't want to go down that road. We're
I was talking about the one at Liberty, to be clear, because that's a great cleanup. But he has actually coached a game from that, so that's why I was talking.
And
about.
I knew what you were referencing. I didn't want someone to hear that the wrong way and think, "Oh, Will's making fun of somebody that just is dealing with his." No. We're talking about like Hugh Freeze raising up the hand against Syracuse. Liberty, doing the best that they can with Hugh Freeze from a hospital bed. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Don't get upset about that. All right, let's end with Notre Dame. Jeremiah Love, best returning running back in the sport, but Jaden Greathouse, he's the one to watch in that offense after he broke out in the CFP. If Notre Dame is in that national championship conversation, it's going to be because that dude is awesome. That's it, Will. That's
boom.
That was 64, 65? What do we do? We just gave everybody listening to this that has anything that comes up. Buddy starts talking about Virginia Tech. We're going to hit this 6.5 regular season over under. Whatever. You meet that person at the park that, oh, yeah, I actually went to Rutgers. Man, Greg Schiano, I just love him for you. Love him for that job forever. Let Greg Schiano get the power to everlasting life so that he can continue to coach at Rutgers. we just gave you all of that material. Is there anything that you would like to add to this, or anything that can be useful to those who do need this cheat sheet, maybe turning the page from basketball back to football?
No, I just think that obviously we've talked about the transfer portal a ton. I think keeping up with the starting quarterbacks and the coordinators is really key. There have been some names on here certainly that made me go, huh?
Yeah.
Guys that are at the Big 12, ACC, where you're like, huh? So I think, honestly, this is even just a worthwhile exercise. As we start to do different check-ins, I think the coaching movement's about settled now, though. So it's just going to be players. But goodness, this feels like, what's up?
The coaching movement, maybe Richard Sherman at Stanford.
See, there you go. Stanford's another one, man. Like, I've always said this about Stanford. People think I'm crazy. They have like a top 5 endowment in America, and therefore kind of like the world. So like they have lots of money out there in Stanford. Now, if they care, that's one thing. And one thing about Luck is he's always been a pretty, like, he is so pure and views college athletics as truly like a student athlete. So I don't know how heavy he's going to lean into like making them into a superpower. But I mean, football's better when Stanford's better. So yeah,
don't say that. Don't say that. Oh, I hate that take.
I did that to mess with you.
You said that just to mess with me. I hate that. Oh my God. So you mean to tell me college football was only at its best when Toby Gerhart was dominating the sport? You mean to tell me that 2015 Christian McCaffrey was the only time that we were able to actually enjoy college football, when Stanford was better in the early part of the 2010s with David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh? Oh, no. Missed me with that.
It's so great because no one's ever said that before, actually. Like, people say that about Miami, USC, whatever. I was like, let me just throw this one in here and see if he bites.
Here's how we tie this all back. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what you don't say.
Yep.
When you're at the swings and you're watching your kids, you're pushing your kids, you're watching your dog drop a deuce at the local park, and you're waiting to pick it up. You're like, you know what? College football is just better when Miami's better. Mm-hmm. Don't be that person.
Or just pick a random team, actually. Actually, you know what? College football's better when Wake Forest is good. You ever notice that? And then people will just be like, huh.
Just say the most obscure thing. When Tulane is popping, man, it's just, man, golly.
Michael Bush? Come on, man.
Those late, like New Mexico State late season with Pavia before he went to Vandy, that's when college football was at its best, man. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you. All right, let's kick it to Billy. He is, as everyone knows, as connected as anyone is on all things A&M. Before we were recording, he was telling me, he's like, oh yeah, I was having dinner with Elko last night. We were talking about yada, yada, yada. Always great insight from the man who lives and breathes everything in College Station. So here is Billy Liucci. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Mr. TexAgs Billy Liucci. Billy, not to start off on too negative of a note here, but you unfortunately had to watch A&M fall just short against Michigan, round of 32 in the NCAA tournament. Can you confirm my theory that Michigan fans always have to be wearing at least 2 pieces of gear at all times?
100%, 100,000%. Is it a Michigan thing or is it a Big Ten thing? That I'm not sure of.
No, it's a Michigan thing, and I can say this because I'm a Big Ten grad.
Yeah, that's true. You're Indiana. That's right.
Like, I do not see it at any other place except Michigan. Even driving home last night, I'm like, oh, I see a Michigan decal on this car that's in front of me. I bet they have another piece of Michigan apparel on the back of their car. They had 3 more on the back of their car.
Well,
why is it?
Well, if we're going to talk about car decals, A&M and Aggies might have the market cornered on having, if you're talking about a multiple, I don't know. If you're talking about 15 to 20 plus, I've just pulled up to the office to come do this sit down with you, and somebody was here. I don't know who. They were parked here talking to our front desk person, and their truck had, like, A&M's got the market cornered on white or maroon trucks with 20 plus stickers. So with that said, just so you know, I'm not piling on the good folks in Ann Arbor, which I don't even know how good they are. You're the Big Ten guy. You can tell me where they rank on the most hated list. But yeah, you are 1,000% right, though. And they'll like mix in a scarf in the middle of like April for no reason. You know, like, there's also, I think, some of that cold weather lag over where they feel the need to layer. So you're getting Michigan layers on top of, hat, shirt, sweater. There's a lot going on for sure.
I'm at my daughter's daycare and I see somebody wearing a Michigan shirt and I'm like, oh, well, I don't see any other piece of Michigan gear. I look down and Michigan socks with sandals. What are we doing here? Just it's over the top.
I don't hate the colors. I hate the fact that they've eliminated A&M now in 2 tournaments where there were really high hopes. You know, a few years ago, they destroyed the Aggies. That was A&M had just blasted North Carolina to get to the Sweet 16, and Michigan knocked them out, ended up playing for the national title, I think, against Florida. And that path included like an 11 seed Florida State and like a 10 or a 12 seed Loyola Chicago. That was to get to the title game. So A&M,
the Nova title game that Michigan
Nova,
played.
that's right. You're exactly right. It's Nova. So that one cost them, you know, I think a shot at playing for it. Now Michigan beat them by 30. This one was different. This was like the Aggies felt like they were in real control of that game, up 10. I think they fired up a 3, decent look that would have put them up either 13 or 14 right after that. And then just the wheels came off, mainly on defense more than anything else, I felt like. And then they started having to play catch up. But that closing run by Michigan was impressive or depressive, depending on how many bumper stickers you had and how many articles of clothing you had on. But that was rough because I was definitely starting to think, okay, Sweet 16 in Atlanta, whether it was Creighton, Auburn, Ole Miss in there, A&M's 3, and it was, believe it or not, 3-0 against those 3 teams this year. So of the 4 possibilities, outside of Michigan State, who they hadn't played, they were 3-0 against that group. Not to say, obviously, a lot harder to beat Auburn in Atlanta in the tournament, but it was Buzz is like 6-2 against Bruce Pearl, so you had a chance there, and you let it slip away in the final 8-10 minutes of that game, and it's something that I think it'll stick with everybody for a while because that team, while not the most talented, they had a lot of really good wins under their belt. I think they have 5 wins against this Sweet 16 right now that's still playing. Auburn was a roadblock. I think they would have had a really difficult time clearing. But, man, in this tournament, you just never know. And you'll never know because they weren't able to finish that one.
So postseason hopes, in a weird way, dashed by the Texas loss, obviously, in football, and then the Michigan loss in basketball.
Yeah.
What is worse to get trapped in a conversation with at the bar, a Michigan fan or a Texas fan?
Well, give me another SEC fan base to Texas because I've not been trapped by a Michigan fan. I just haven't been in that position. So give me an SEC fan base to compare the Longhorn trap to.
Okay,
because I get trapped in Longhorn conversations every day on this right here, every day on Twitter. So I know this feeling better than anyone.
a Bama fan?
Texas, way worse. There's a difference though with Texas and A&M fans. I feel like they hate each other a lot more online than in person. Does that make sense? Like the Twitter wars, the message boards, the things they'll say about me, the things I'll say about them, or the fan bases versus each other. Our site's got some thread of millions of page views. There's one on one of the Texas sites, I think Orange Bloods. It's like something about Liucci has not been this despondent since. It's like 3 million page views and like 35,000. It's a pretty insane deal. But I think when in person, they're better. The one that seems the two that seem the most contentious to me, A&M wise, are like LSU and Arkansas, believe it or not.
Interesting.
Bama fans have been great. I've been to Tuscaloosa when A&M's beaten Alabama. I've been out in College Station after the Aggies beat the Tide. I've been to Tuscaloosa when they beat A&M 59-0 and went to Gillettes, or what's the other one called over there that everybody goes to?
Ramajang?
No, it's way the hell out there. some weird name. But anyway, like they're great. Win, lose. I coming into the SEC, all I heard was how bad they were. They've never been bad to A&M, and like I said, even in defeat, they've been pretty good.
Okay, your unbiased opinion. What do you think of Texas's year one schedule in the SEC?
Joke. I mean, can I say two things? I thought the schedule is a joke. It's a special. I've said this all year, and I get regularly ratioed by one of my good friends on the Longhorn side, Amanda Atwell, for saying this. Like anything I say comes back to bite me, but I'm going to say it anyway. The schedule was a joke. It's especially a joke, not so much compared to A&M. I said repeatedly I thought A&M had a favorable draw too, especially for year one under a coach. They had a very favorable draw, and should have beaten Auburn, and it would have been a nice 6-2 record against a favorable draw, which would have been an outstanding first season. But Texas's draw compared to Oklahoma's, and Texas's draw, because for years we've been telling them you don't understand the SEC and the week to week to week of it. And now they're sitting back and go, this isn't that bad. And they refuse to grasp or understand that you had it easy. But there's a flip side to that, Connor, that I do have to give them credit for, because they still did what Bama couldn't do, which is beat Vandy. They did what Ole Miss couldn't do, which is beat Kentucky. They did what who else are we talking about that stumbled? They did what Georgia. Well, no, Georgia lost to Ole Miss.
What else you couldn't do?
LSU couldn't do. Beat A&M at Kyle Field. So did what Tennessee, another playoff team, could not do, which is beat Arkansas in Fayetteville. So while none of those individual games impress me, beating Kentucky, beating Arkansas, they don't impress you. Vandy. Everyone else stubbed their toe, and Texas didn't. Now, what I don't think the Longhorns had to deal with was when they lost to Georgia at home. Somewhere in there was like Vandy and a bye, I believe. I don't know if it was before or after, but it was something like some form or fashion of Vandy and a bye. They also did what Bama couldn't do and beat Oklahoma, by the way. But you go Georgia, and they missed Ole Miss, LSU, Alabama, Tennessee. I mean, that's missing a lot in year one. And I just never looked at that schedule and saw anything daunting when it came to like a back-to-back or this 3-game stretch where 2 are on the road and 3 really tough. They missed South Carolina too. In theory, you could say they missed like 5 of the top 6 teams outside of themselves in the SEC. So it was weak, but they did what others did not. So they absolutely deserve their way in. I just would say it's going to get a lot tougher after next year when they revamp the schedule, which I'm 100% convinced they're going to do. And then the next side of that is compared directly to what they gave Oklahoma. That's the fan base that has the real gripe. When that's your rival, you recruit against each other, you play against each other. You got 2 head coaches that kind of came in around the same time, and you're trying to, enter the league without getting stomped all over. They gave OU a schedule that will, get most programs stomped all over, and that's what we're seeing. Texas, the gap between those 2 schedules is pretty remarkable.
You got to see the return of A&M in Texas, and not just on the internet, but like actually playing football. You saw the way that those stakes just set the hype, and it felt like, I mean, the biggest game in the post Manziel era at Kyle Field. I think I would say even bigger than the opener against Notre Dame. All those different things. Where do you now believe that rivalry ranks in this sport?
I think it's absolutely right there at the top. It's got to settle in now. You played one here, you got to play one there and let it settle in. I don't think I don't think there's anything better. I wouldn't say it's necessarily better than the Iron Bowl, better than, Ohio State, Michigan, but it is at the top. Texas OU, I think is the most unique because I know the cocktail party is also this setup, but just split down the 50-yard line, 50-50 at the Cotton Bowl, equidistant. I mean, that one's the most unique. A&M Texas, it's the largest state in the country. It's two programs that pretty much everyone that grows up in the largest state, either themselves or their families are split. You've got, it's so big and there's so much, it's like hatred within the family, hatred amongst friends, but it is hatred. It is like it to win that game changes seasons. Way back in the day, you'd get more Aggies saying that this then than now, which was, I'd rather go 1-11 and beat Texas than 11-1 and lose to them. Now that mindset, I think, has changed enough. There's still some that wouldn't quite say that, but their actions would tell you that. But no, I just think there's so much there's so much at stake in terms of bragging rights and day to day, the rest of your life in that year, at work, at the household, at dinner, with friends and family, at reunions, or in the high school locker rooms, wherever you may be within teams. There's so much at stake in terms of bragging rights. It's a really, really big deal, and that doesn't even account for recruiting. And here's the other thing, Connor, and I think you can tell me you probably get some of this with Auburn, Alabama, but I don't think to this level. And I certainly know you don't with Ohio State, Michigan. The universities, like the culture of each and the fan bases and like the mindset of the fan bases, one side's called, the Aggies call them tea sippers, and then A&M, the Longhorns, refer to them as, they're like, view them as farmers. And both these things go back so far, and it's so ingrained that even though as time has gone on, it's probably become, there's a lot more intersection than there ever has been, but that will never change. Like, they're just perceived as one side entitled, one side roll the sleeves up, blue collar. It's just, it is what it is, and that will never change in this rivalry.
Yeah, in a weird way, it doesn't really remind me of Michigan and Ohio State in that way. And that's more so just truly hating what someone stands for, not so much your way of life. It almost takes me back to the 90s with Knicks Pacers and stuff. Like the Hicks, the city
Hicks
folk versus the Hicks.
Yeah.
Hicks versus Knicks, and like that whole thing. And the way that, the way that people are wired as human beings can shape a rivalry. And I think it is fascinating. And as someone that didn't grow up with it in the way that you did, I love the fact that we're going to get this as a result of, realignment and expansion and all these different things. What was a memory that stood out from that first return of this game that you're just like, man, this is kind of surreal, and it's great to just have this back and to have this on the calendar, knowing that however a season goes, that's there to be able to close a regular season.
Well, part of it is when you evaluate Mike Elko's first season, and I've been going through this with Aggies a lot because they were so disappointed about that finish. And I have had Elko sit here at this desk and say it's inexcusable the way we finished. But really, if they tackle Peyton Thorne on 4th and 2 or 3, whatever it was, they're 9-3 in year one and playing for the SEC title, regardless of what happened to Texas. It would have been the Longhorns and Aggies a week later in Atlanta. And even with that failure at Jordan-Hare, I said Jordan-Hare, I'm sorry, Auburn fans.
I wasn't going to correct you. We know.
Even with that failure there, they took the field against Texas to play for the SEC title. In 13 years in the league, they have never taken the field in their final game in a win-and-you're-in scenario. And that's year one. And look, Mike Elko won 2 top 10 games at home. I've had people, A&M people go, well, it was LSU and Missouri. They weren't really top 10. We don't do that. Like, no one in college football, whether it's Nick Saban, Ryan Day, Ed O, Les Miles, Brian Kelly, Sark, R.C. Slocum, Jim Tressel. What is your record against top 10 opponents? That goes by who you beat when they were ranked in the top 10. It's not end of season ranking. It's not preseason. When you play them, where they rank. And by the way, Mizzou and LSU were like 9 and 10 win teams. In year one, the Aggies beat the brakes off both of them. 2 top 10 teams. They won 41-10, 38-23, whatever it was. And then started off 7-1. They started the year losing to a team that played for the national title, where it's tied with 2 minutes to go. They ended the year losing 17-7 to Texas. Now, with that said, that's my big push. That was a really it was a strong first season for a head coach in the SEC. It ended wrong. Had they made the tackle against Auburn, not dropped the 2-point conversion, whatever it was, they win that game. Everyone views this season completely differently. And I think they're talking about Marcel Reed a little more too. He had 2, I know you want to talk about that in a minute, so I'll save that one. We'll talk Marcel in a second. The thing that stood out to me about that game as I meandered there, because there was so much at stake, almost maybe unexpectedly, in year one, where Texas was going and A&M was going if they won. So the thing that stood out to me, Connor, is just the pregame, the tailgating, and just, man, I'm telling you, if you grew up in this state, just seeing that sea of maroon with that burnt orange spliced in and everybody hanging out together and everybody drinking, and it was a flat out party right here across the street all day, and you see, it's just been so long since you've seen burnt orange and maroon and white commingling like that. And it's, you used to see it growing up all the time. And it wasn't like there was some big invasion of Texas fans here, but there was enough that you saw Aggies and Longhorns together partying and then going in that stadium, like hoping like hell you'd kick the other one's ass. So that was, to me, that was the thing that stood out most to me, to just be out there and kind of look around and be like, damn, it's really back.
You're the best person to probably answer this question. What's the biggest difference between Mike Elko and Jimbo Fisher?
I don't know if there's they couldn't be more different, and it's not an insult to Jimbo. I got along great with Jimbo. I like Jimbo. It didn't work here. He almost had it work. His third year, they finished top 5, and you thought, damn, it could go. And they couldn't get it over the hump, and then it kind of all came apart. But not an insult to Jimbo, but they couldn't be more different. And I think the biggest thing I noticed with Coach Elko is his ability to kind of see and be on top of every aspect of not just his program, but being the head coach at Texas A&M, and this NIL era and the portal era, and how you need to build out your staff, and the importance of these one-on-one dinners with the right donors, and flying around to sit down to fundraising dinners as often as he possibly can, with the schedule. Being real aware of where things are heading in college football in terms of those things we just talked about, and NIL, and I think also just day-to-day conversations with his players, just to kind of understand, like, we can all talk about NIL around here. It's not a 4-letter word. It's only 3 letters. We can talk about it, and his honesty with the guys, and he can be really blunt, and just as quickly be, super complimentary. And it works. It plays well with the athletes, and he can be a real hard ass at practice on the field, and walking off the field, those guys can put their arm around him. So I think the biggest thing, though, Connor, is just the ability to kind of manage everything that goes with building a great football team outside of football.
Let's talk Marcel Reed, because I'm really intrigued with the player that he was this past year. You know, you and I have talked about this. I was a big Connor Wigman guy. It's a shame that, unfortunately, the year that he had just didn't materialize. But I think everybody kind of sees the flashes with Marcel, and it's like, man, this is a guy that could end up being, you know, the second post Manziel quarterback to kind of start and finish his career at A&M. You know, joining Kellen Mond in that club. I think, though, there are reasons to be skeptical, mainly the downfield passing. Like 14.8% of his throws were 20 yards downfield. Justin completion percentage, 27.8%. Like you could point to some of those numbers and go, that's going to give me some pause for thinking this guy is ready to be truly elite. What's a realistic expectation for his game and how he fits into that hierarchy of you know, SEC quarterback tiers?
Yeah, no, great question, because I think when you're breaking down the SEC quarterbacks this year, if you just took off any bias and actually looked at everyone and not just those top few guys, which so many do, right? I think his range might be the most significant. He's the wild card to me, and I'm sure you could give me a second one, but he's the wild card of the bunch. I mean, if you go compare his numbers and Lagway's last year, and it wasn't like Marcel had a slew of NFL receivers he was working with, and it was a first-year system. Marcel's, it's not the numbers, and I agree with you. He's got to work on the downfield passing. I think he's got to work on the field vision, and sometimes it's not the throws he didn't complete; it's the throws he didn't make. In that Texas game, there were 2 times where guys were really open. One, I think he hit a wheel, but the post, I think, was wide open for a touchdown. Like, there's things like that, and that's not a knock on Marcel, because I'm going to tell you, this is a very smart, intelligent young man. He's going to pick it up. I think people, as we're evaluating him, forget, you mentioned Connor. I was super high on Connor. I think he's going to do well at U of H. As you know, and a lot of people, and you know, down there in Austin don't understand, like, NFL people were extremely high on number 15 heading into last season. There are Aggie fans even that think, well, Colin Klein didn't want it to be Connor because Marcel is this dual threat. That's not true at all. Like,
they would have hit the portal if that were the case.
They would have hit the portal. They would have gone after Cam Ward. They would have gone and behind the scenes pursued a Lagway. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't think Lagway's great. That would have been a really, even to get him to think about, would have been the most expensive thing. But yeah, I mean, they would have gone after, for sure, like a Cam Ward. You know, he's a Houston kid, leaving Washington State. They believed in Connor to the point that's why they put him back against that in that Missouri game. And if he'd have played well against LSU, it was his job the rest of the season. It wasn't a knock on Marcel. Marcel wasn't ready to start last season. He wasn't the starter. They had an off season of competition. He did not win it. He was thrust into action. No knock on Marcel, but he was thrust into action before he was fully ready. And it's a credit to his talent and the fact that the dude's a winner and a competitor, that he was able to do what he did at Florida. Showed a lot of poise against Arkansas when the offenses weren't working on either side, and he just kind of hung in, made a few plays with his legs, didn't make mistakes, made a couple of big throws, and then, you know, sat down for Missouri and then asked to come back a couple weeks later against LSU off the bench and did what he did. Like, I think when you look at Marcel Reed, you go back and you say, give this kid an entire offseason as a starter. He started, or count LSU, right? He finished second half, 6 of 8 SEC games. And look, Connor, like, if the defense makes 2 more plays, I mentioned the 4th down against Auburn, and there was a 4th down in like 11 or so against USC. If the defense makes those 2 plays, Marcel Reed, and I understand, look, if they did beat Auburn, they wouldn't be playing USC, yada, yada. But Marcel, in 2 of his last 3 games, leads A&M on last-minute touchdown drives to win the game at Jordan-Hare and in a bowl game. How much different would we be talking about number 10 right now had the Aggie defense gotten 2 fourth-down stops? I think the conversation would feel quite a bit differently. I'm with you. Improve as a passer. See things better, like you maybe just get rid of the ball quicker, don't overthink it. Sometimes these younger quarterbacks that are that intelligent, I find that they tend to kind of overthink instead of just cut loose. When that dude cuts loose and plays, he can be really special. And I think with confidence, the relationship between he and Klein and confidence in that system, and now having played games at South Carolina, at the Swamp, at Auburn, bowl game against a great Texas defense, I think his confidence has to be sky high right now.
Agreed. Love that he kept fighting in a lot of those games too, when there are a lot of guys that would have just completely turtled and could have been much uglier.
Down 21-0 at Auburn, and he ended up not only giving them the lead, but you look at his stats in that one, he had a terrific game.
Definitely. Can you clear the air with the Micah Hudson situation? Because a lot of people probably, if you've been following that story, former 5-star receiver, spent 1 season at Texas Tech, didn't really play a whole lot, transfers to A&M in the post-regular season window. Turns out we find out at the start of spring practice he's not transferring to Texas A&M. Like, what exactly went down with all that?
Yeah, I think nothing against the media member who I'm friends with that asked that question. I think you know how media goes when you haven't had the head coach in front of you in a while. It's kind of like almost like a housekeeping question, to kind of kick things off. Hey, is Micah Hudson still with the team? Elko answers, no, he's not with the team. That's what he said. He's like, okay, Micah's not with the team. And it made it through the news cycle like a second time, right? Months later. I think the dude was here for a matter of days, not weeks, and went up and said he wasn't going to play football. Now, I think he will ultimately try to, but he's not going to play it at A&M. And like I said, it wasn't weeks, it was days that he was here, and that was all the way back in January. So he hasn't been a part of anything for a while there. And I think with Micah, the Aggies, and this is where I've even had some, you mentioned, some of these former players have called me, man, what's the deal? There was so much misinformation. Number one, that bogus NIL thing that every dumbass, can I say that on your show? Every dumbass that wants to pretend to cover college football believed, because any idiot on Twitter can make up a fake graphic that, like I said, everyone trips all over themselves to put out there as true, like a $30 million recruiting class. When I think, 2 teams now, several years into it, 2 or 3, maybe Texas, Ohio State, Oregon are up over 30 million. A&M apparently 4 years ago paid that much for 1 class, just the freshmen. This is stupid as crap. And so with this Micah Hudson, and you had that thing about the fake NIL deal where he demanded a driver, and him and his family could determine when he could. It was I couldn't believe how many people I otherwise had, and I hope you're not one of them as I'm saying this, believe that was true. And I guess you can believe anything. That's the lesson, I guess. Anything in NIL era seems plausible. That was completely false. He came in and the thought was, this dude's talent is off the charts good. That's why he was a 5-star. It was a huge coup for Texas Tech to get him. He has a long way to go as a player to fulfill that potential. And he might go back to Lubbock and find that. Maybe it might be the best place for him is to go back, and they know him. They know where he needs to get, where he needs to go. But when he left, A&M had Mario Craver, Casey Concepcion out of NC State, they both look really good out here. Concepcion, I think, is a total stud. Craver's over there making plays against Georgia, Texas, and A&M last year as a true freshman. Terry Bussey was their own 5-star that flashed quite a bit last year, even though they moved him over from corner midway through fall camp. And they're pretty excited about Ashton Bethel-Roman out of the freshman rank. So, and at the time, here's the biggest thing. At the time that Micah Hudson left, Noah Thomas was on the team. So to me, Micah was 5th or 6th best receiver, needing to prove it to even work his way up. It was a flyer. They took a flyer on a really talented player. And if he gets it right, I hope it's Tech, because A, I'm a big Joey McGuire fan. B, I think that's where he's got his best chance. He can be really good, but I just don't think this year it was going to be like icing on the cake. It was going to be like, an extra bonus if Micah Hudson surged up and beat those guys out to be a key factor in it. I think everybody was just going off the 5-star stuff. What people should be focused more on, if you want to be concerned, was like they don't have a lot of size at the position. And Noah Thomas was a big, proven, going into a second year in the system, 4th year at A&M, outside receiving threat that's been through the battles and has made a lot of plays in his career. Actually had his best year here at A&M last year, and you lost him to a conference rival. So many less people have asked me about Noah than asked me about Micah, and that's the actual loss, because that was going to be a senior receiver at 6'5", running on the outside, that's played 3 years in the SEC.
Okay, so let's close with that. Why is it that a guy like Noah Thomas escapes a situation where you retain the offensive coordinator, you kind of know what you're getting with a quarterback that you had a lot of success with, and you go to a situation in Georgia where, let's be honest, we can all point to NIL. We can say, oh, they dropped the bag for this. They had a need at receiver, and therefore he wasn't going to say no. But reality is, if you're pre-draft, you're thinking about your situation. What is Gunnar Stockton going to bring to the table? What do you feel like you're getting out of this relationship in return? What exactly is your viewpoint of how that situation played out and why he is ultimately not going to be at A&M next year?
I think it's a head-scratching decision by Noah. I'm not hoping it doesn't work out for him or anything, but if we're just being real honest, it's not. Look, if he's a deep threat down the field and he's wondering how much am I going to get the ball, and if he's got anyone in his ear in his camp saying you need more touches, the NFL. In 1 year, like I said, I think he had his best year at A&M this past year. He does know the quarterback. And if someone were to try to say, well, maybe he doesn't think Marcel was the guy, my answer would be, and Gunnar Stockton is, based on what? And Stockton could be good, but and that Georgia passing game is based on what? I mean, I know with Bowers and McConkey and some of the guys before that, but Bobo and that Georgia passing, like I'm saying, if he'd have gone to Baton Rouge and been catching passes from Nussmeier and following in that receiving assembly line they've got down there, I think it would be more frustrating because you have to play against him, but it would be more understandable. Even the Texas offense and what they're, because I know there was some interest on the Longhorns part. So it's not why did he left A&M thing, so I'm questioning it. I'm questioning the destination outside of the fact that James Coley's there, who I believe recruited him to A&M and certainly coached him here in Aggieland.
Yeah, it'll be a fascinating receiver room to dissect this year, especially with all the big-time portal additions that they've been able to make. Billy, great stuff. Love everything that you guys do. I love being able to come on with you guys. I always look forward to it and appreciate your perspective, man. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll see you we'll see you in Atlanta, hopefully before that.
That's hey man, that's the plan. I'm gonna blink and it's gonna be here. Looking forward to it.
I know. Well, you know what? Unfortunately, not Atlanta this weekend. A&M, Ole Miss, Auburn, that would have been a damn party, wouldn't it?
It would have been. Hey,
all right, Connor, appreciate you, buddy.
Hey, thanks, man. Well, let's close it with some lad of the week. Tons and tons of candidates after opening weekend of March Madness. And as it turns out, we were talking before we hopped on here, and we have the same exact lad of the week. I have another one that we'll get to after, but why don't you start with the one that we both had?
Absolutely. So my lad of the week, or our joint lad of the week, is John Calipari. Cal is a guy I've talked about. My family friends that are Kentucky fans, and I remember the stories of waking up to my buddy's dad like browsing Rivals.com forums at like 7 or 8 a.m. before school, talking about getting Boogie Cousins. And so I remember being excited, with my buddies when Cal was hired. And so it was the Gillespie era coming off of, and so you know modern coaching kind of dynasties or these long runs, they're becoming few and farther between. And so what Kentucky had with Calipari, right, where he comes in hot off of the Derrick Rose quote unquote scandal that wouldn't be a scandal today, right? And the test score stuff, not gonna get into that, but in terms of Calipari was seen as this wheeler dealer guy who could go kind of anywhere, and he stuck with one school for a really like underrated amount of time. But by the time he left, and went to Arkansas, and I understand why that rubbed a lot of Kentucky fans the wrong way, and any fan base, should feel that way, especially with a competitor. But one thing about Calipari is I don't think we ever saw it lasting this long at Kentucky. And especially as it wound down at the end, it was starting to look like the game had passed him by a little bit, round of 64, round of 32, round of 64 to end his Kentucky career. So he was starting to be seen as a little bit of, my boys used to call him the Les Miles of college basketball, right? He had these great players, but the offense was a little clunky, and you could kind of look back and say, oh, even Cat wasn't taking threes. So we all saw that he was a great recruiter. He was a great regular season coach, but he would get to the tournament and kind of just tense up a little bit. So how could we have predicted that this guy would have gone through Kansas for the Battle of Arkansas, famously, and then to play against or to coach against Rick Pitino, who is seen as kind of, the former Kentucky coach who is, back out there, date Mike, date Rick. He was ready. He had put himself back on the market. He was becoming like what we had seen Rick Pitino be for most of his career. And for Calipari to go through those two specific teams in a row and show like, hey, it's year one at Arkansas. We had our struggles. We had some injuries. We were kind of a bubble team this year for most of the year. But this is setting up for a situation where it's like, hey, is this the floor? And I think Calipari, and again, like, I understand the Kentucky perspective on this a ton. I understand how hard it was, or like kind of how rough it was at the end with him, kind of wanting him gone, him leaving a sour taste. Mark Pope, I think, is a great hire. I think he's going to do great things at Kentucky. But that being said, seeing Cal kind of do the "How do you like me now" tour has been pretty awesome.
Toby Keith win after Toby Keith win. He's been racking them up. Getting the win in Lexington, I thought was going to be absolutely the high point of his season. Did not think that they would win an NCAA tournament game at that point. And then to have the two wins that he did against respected coaches. Yeah, you're right. And look, I'm not a Cal guy. I haven't been a Cal guy. Even when he was doing great things, just never been my favorite person.
He's easy to hate. He really is. He's the stereotypical old school basketball coach with the slick back hair, the nice suit,
Yeah, and like I think everybody involved in this situation is perfectly entitled to feel the way that they feel. If you're sitting here trying to tell Kentucky fans how to feel about this and that they shouldn't boo him, you're out of your mind. You didn't live it and breathe it in the same way that they did during those 5 years, really. That 5-year run of frustration. And at the same time, if you are an Arkansas fan that said, hey, we went out, we got this guy, after our guy left, after our guy goes to USC, that's what Muss did, and you feel like you want to show the world, hey, look what we did. Nobody would have thought that John Calipari would be coaching the lowest remaining seed in the NCAA tournament. I mean, that is not something that for the late part of his Kentucky run would have ever been thrown on him. Like, nobody would have ever assumed that was going to happen. So I was watching that St. John's game just kind of in amazement. I was like, they're going to do this. They're going to do this. And seeing his wife, Ellen, really emotional at the end of it. I said to Lauren, I'm like, I don't know that I've ever seen a coach's wife that emotional as the final seconds are ticking down of a game, at least a non-title winning game or something like that. And I think she's perfectly entitled to feel that way too. I see absolutely no issue with that whatsoever. But yeah, that moment just clearly meant a lot to him. And for Arkansas fans that are just able to rack up Sweet 16 berths with one coach after another, I'm a little jealous. Man. A little bit. I threw that stat out there on Twitter. 4 Sweet 16 trips that they've had in the 2020s. I'm an Indiana grad who has watched his team in the last 30 years have as many trips to the Sweet 16. All right?
That's crazy. Yeah. I will say, though, I think you succinctly wrapped that up perfectly, which is that we are kind of used to seeing Cal's teams being higher seeds and getting upset. So the concept of him coming in as a lower seed with his back against the wall and outperforming his talent, I think, is really cool.
I think it was and I'm pretty sure that was his first win in the NCAA tournament against a higher seed since 2014.
I would believe that.
Yeah, which is bananas, man. Absolutely bananas. But yeah, maybe by the time people are listening to this, Arkansas will already be either eliminated or moving on to the Elite Eights. One more. Gary Danielson.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody that people have a couple of opinions about as well. A couple of different opinions out there about good old Gary. But yeah, about an hour before we were recording today, found out that Gary Danielson is going to be retiring at the end of the 2025 season. Charles Davis is going to be taking his place after this season on CBS Sports. And I wasn't really surprised because even going back to conversation I had with Gary at SEC Media Days in 2023, ahead of his last season with SEC on CBS, you got the sense he wasn't going to do this for much longer.
Mm-hmm.
Just wasn't going to, even as a Big Ten grad, which is kind of crazy, that he's a Purdue guy. And I didn't get the sense that going to the Big Ten excited him that much. I didn't. And maybe some of that was me inferring, but you could tell that he was going to miss the SEC. And for everybody that points to the frustrations that they've had with Gary over the years, and I've voiced mine as well, certain references, comparisons to one Cameron Newton. I do not really like that Gary does that, but the voice of an era, he and Vern, the voices of a really important time, not just in the SEC, but in the history of college football. And for all of the criticism that he takes, that he wears, and he truly says, like, look, I want that criticism. That shows me that you care. I think that somebody would be remiss if they just totally, clapped him off the stage and said, smell you later. I do think he brought good to this sport, even if he wasn't your favorite person to listen to.
The other day I was doing, as I often do, just randomly watching old LSU clips, right? I was watching a 2007 clip, had to go relive our boy Hester and Matt Flynn with the game against Florida. And I was listening to, how good the crew was on that game. And this thought hit me, right? This feels like I'm skipping a step here, but just in direct response to what you said, how much of our frustration with that CBS crew was the fact that we were just watching Alabama smoke our teams in that window every week?
Some of it. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Whether you want to admit it or not, it's some of it. It has to be.
Because I'm watching that going, like, I was like, wow, this feels awesome. This feels like a big game. I'm like, why do I have such frustration with this crew? It's like, because I watched my team lose for like 10 straight years in this window to Alabama. And the whole time I was going, that's not that guy's name. You're dumb. And I'm like, we're down 10 points. That's why I'm mad right now. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad that I'm watching this game and it feels rigged because we can't beat Alabama.
It's true. It's a good point. It is always hard to stomach that. Why is he just giving them so much love all the time?
He's giving them so much credit. Well, this is their 7th straight win, brother. What is he supposed to say? It's really looking bad out there.
It's a tough spot. But yeah, Gary is someone who, look, if you go back and watch those old games, I think you'd be surprised that not everything that comes out of his mouth is just nails on a chalkboard.
Well, and they feel like big. Like we talked about this. I think like Gus Johnson is another guy that's able to come be there for the moment and see what is the moment and how to encapsulate it. I think especially during that, I guess not peak, but like the nostalgic SEC era, like the mid 2000s is what I'd call it, or the early 2010s. They were really great at framing those moments.
They were, and if Gary was bad at his job, CBS would have gotten rid of him a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
He is not bad at his job. I'll defend him in that regard. He just might not always say exactly what you want him to say in a moment. And there are other announcers that admittedly do a better job of it. And there are plenty of other color commentators in the sport that I like more than Gary. I'm not saying I would listen to Gary as my number one choice, but the guy meant a lot to a very specific era of SEC football. And whether you will admit it or not, there will be a part of you, SEC fan, who does not like Gary Danielson, that is going to continue to miss ripping on Gary Danielson and using that as your outlet. And he's okay with that. Like he's admitted, bring it on me. Don't bring it on the entire CBS crew. Just bring your hate towards me. I can take it. I can handle it. I'm a big boy.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, one more thing. Remember, again, if your bracket is busted, Dabble has you covered. Get in on the daily fantasy action with Dabble. Remember, use that promo code SDS2. Get $25 in bonus cash. No deposit required. That's promo code SDS2 on Dabble. That's a pod. Please, please, please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Started Down South podcast, plus many more clips, interviews, and whatnot. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.